He is a Nashville singer-songwriter from Ohio, and he's coming to the Loveland Stage Company Saturday, April 6th as part of the LSC Music Series. He'll be presenting his show called Origins with two other singer-songwriters from Nashville. Bringing Mark Leach in to share the Nashville songwriting story was the brainchild of Tom Allen, who met Mark during a performance in Loveland years ago. Hi, I'm Chuck Gibson, and this is Loveland Beacon Talks. It is my pleasure now to have both Tom Allen and Mark Leach join me on Loveland Beacon Talks. Well, welcome Tom Allen, and along with you, special guest Mark Leach. Thank you for joining us here on Loveland Beacon Talks today as we head into Loveland Stage Company Music Series discussion. And greetings, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, Chuck.
Hey, Mark, it's my pleasure. Tom, likewise, it's a pleasure to have you on, both of you as well. Looking forward to hearing the story and sharing it with the listeners for Loveland Beacon Talks. Going to hand off, Mark, going to let you be on standby here for a second because I'm going to hand off to Tom Allen to tell us what is this Origins show and the Loveland Stage Company Music Series. What's the background on this? What's going to be happening?
Hey, thanks, Chuck. I'm happy to share that with you. About a month ago, I became aware that the Loveland Stage Company was beginning to do some things that were new for them. And I reached out to Gary Giver to learn a little bit more about it. Gary's the board member who's responsible for this music series. And I learned that they started doing these series to help with some of their capital expenses. They've got some things like a new HVAC system that's going to cost a pretty penny. And they felt that they had some opportunities to use the stage at downtimes when they weren't doing their traditional theater. So that's pretty cool. I've known Mark for quite a while, and in fact, I met him when he was a young man. Not that he's that old now, but I met him when he was a young man performing at a show, a little grand opening at a restaurant in Loveland, and I got to take some photos of him, and I consider him a friend now over these years, and I've had the opportunity to see him play and grow as an artist. And so I thought, gee, this would be a great opportunity, having seen the success that Gary had with his first show with a couple of folks out of Nashville, to do something with Mark. So I don't want to steal Mark's thunder, but we began talking about it, and his brother Chris, who's also a musician who lives in Loveland and is also a businessman, began participating in the conversation with us, and I guess I'll turn it over to Mark to talk a little bit about what we're going to do and how that came about. Does that sound all right?
That's perfect. But real quick, and I'll interject right before you get started, Mark, explaining a little bit. So for the listeners right now, what we're talking about is coming up pretty quick as we're sitting here recording this on it's March 20th, so time is flying by. But Saturday, April 6th, Origins with Mark Leach. And so, Mark, tell us about. I don't know anything about it. You tell me, what is Origins presented by Mark Leach, Nashville singer-songwriter?
Yeah. So, well, first again, thanks for having me. But before I get into that, I do want to thank Tom Allen and my brother Chris for really kind of birthing this idea. Because my brother Chris called me and he said, "Hey, I was talking to Tom. Like, we had this idea for like this thing that we thought could be really cool," and I was on board. I was like, "Let's do it." And I will say that Tom has been carrying the torch for this whole process. So just double kudos to them. But really, it's in Nashville, in Midtown, like off of Demumbrian Street or Division Street. They've got what are called Songwriters rounds. And so if you go to Nashville, you won't really find them on Broadway too much. That's usually more like the honky-tonk covers, touristy section. But if you make your way to Midtown, that's where all of the up-and-coming artists and writers are. And what it usually looks like is 3 or 4 writers/artists on stage. They're all just on bar stools. It's nothing fancy. And they go one by one down the line. They tell the story of how they wrote the song. And then they song. And so the listener gets to hear the origin of, the song. And so when I was presented with the idea of, like, there's a theater in Loveland that would love to do this, and I get to bring, 2 artists of my choice to, like, come play with me, the 2 guys that I picked, Josh Withenshaw and Evan Blankenship, it was a no-brainer. They're 2 of my best buddies, from the industry. So that's kind of a really Cliff Notes version of it, but yeah.
Well, and Cliff Notes is a good start, helps our listeners understand what we're talking about, Mark. But also, hey, forget the Cliff Note. Let's get into some real details. Let me first ask a little bit about you, Mark. What, who the heck are you?
Mark.
I've got a pretty good idea. I have been, as you said, thank you to Tom Allen, who has helped promote this and brought this to my attention so that we have this opportunity to talk. So I've got an idea a little bit about Mark Leach, the Nashville singer-songwriter, and some of your musical background. But share some details. What got you going, and again, some more details about those writers' rounds. Back to you.
Yeah, so back in, I think it's 2008, I was in college, and I was starting to write, kind of trying to be like, better about my songwriting. And then 2010, I went and helped my family at our butcher bakery shop in Barberton. And I was like, one of my jobs was like making barbecue sauce. So they would put me in, like, there's like this little house that's away from everybody, and I would be in there like mixing barbecue sauce stuff, but I was by myself, so nobody could hear me. So I would just be singing these lyrics out and writing them down as I'm mixing barbecue sauce in this huge vat, and ended up writing my first album doing that. And then went down to Nashville in 2010, and I was going once a month for about 5 years. Moved there in 2015. And then started writing, like, seriously for publishers for about another 5 years, and then moved back because COVID hit. And that's kind of the brief kind of history of how I got into this.
Mark, you said something. Can I jump in with a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
You said something that triggered the thought for me. Mark, you talked about writing for publishers. Can you share with us, and I'm interested, and I think others will be too, how do you get from a piece of blank paper and, writing with someone? How does all that work, and then how does it end up in front of somebody who we all have heard on the radio?
It's a constant, you gotta be out constantly. It gets exhausting sometimes too, because it's almost like every single night, every single afternoon, whatever, you're going to different rounds, different meetings, different showcases, and you're just meeting all these people. Well, eventually you start seeing the same people over and over. They start learning your name. They start finding out you're a writer, and then, kind of word gets around town. That's why they call it, for the band actually got their name, it's called Little Big Town. And then so once they get to know you, then you start scheduling meetings with them in their offices. And then if they like you and they like your stuff, they start pitching you around to different writers or artists that might be trying to finish up a project or a certain type of genre of song they're looking for, whether that's like mid-tempo or ballad or upbeat or a drinking song, whatever it is. And they'll let you know. So you go into the room with other writers. And I always compare it to kind of going on a first date. If you don't know the writer you're writing with, you both sit down, you generally come in with a hook, which is the title. If you're a little more professional, you come in with at least a verse and like part of the chorus written just to kind of get the juices flowing. Mm-hmm. And then if it goes well, you'll both know it. Sometimes you both don't know it, and one person is just like, I don't see a future for us here. And then the other person's like, wow, that was like the best first date I ever had. And then you both kind of just walk away, and then you never call them again. But
Mark, so I have a question. We kind of know what happens when that first date isn't, you're not on the same page. But what happens to that? Maybe those verses you guys worked on, and maybe you were the one that's like, nah, this isn't going anywhere, and the other guy walks off thinking that was great stuff. What happens if that guy walks off and says, I think that's great stuff, and uses it? Or how's that work?
See, so this is kind of where it gets tricky. So what the bummer is that what you do is like, so when you're putting everything down on like, let's say a template on your phone or whatever it is, but it's like you've got the title of the song, the writer's in the room, and then the DOC, the date of creation. So everybody's got record of it.
Oh, I see.
And so when you all leave the room, everybody walks away with that same, sheet of paper. And they can pretty much do whatever they want with it. As well as, you, regardless if you came in with the title or the verse and chorus, the saying in Nashville is a word is a third. So if you got three writers in the room and one guy says, let's change the and to the, they get credit for that. Yeah, for that right. It can be tricky. Sometimes it works out in your favor and you're like, wow, I never would have had. Because other writers know, artists that you don't, and, vice versa. So they might have an in with somebody that you didn't have one in with. So it can work out for you, and sometimes it doesn't.
Mark, you get paid for these rights by the publisher since they're putting you out there with somebody, and you go spend a couple hours. Is there like a rate for that?
You can, but you don't get paid for the hours. You get paid. It's like you have to write so many songs in a quarter or throughout the year. You have to, but they've got to be completely demoed out. They've got to be like recorded professionally, is what I mean. And then and then so you might get however much. If you get a cut, obviously you're going to get paid a lot more. Which I mean, cut is a major artist records your song.
I see.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for the explanation. I love it.
Yeah, what, and Tom,
really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and Tom, that was a great question because going to do the rounds, that's nice that the potential for pay from working those rounds exists. It's not just I don't know, jamming for nothing, as it were. But
yeah, it sounds like it's a lot on the kind of you hold your breath and hope as well, at least in terms of a major payday.
Yeah, for sure it is too, and that's really how it kind of boils down to, because you there's only been two major artists I think that I've had holds with, and a hold is usually when you write a song, then the label or the publisher will get a hold of you and they'll be like, hey, so and so is interested in recording this song, please don't give it to anybody else. And so two of my songs George Strait put on hold, and then another song Sam Hunt put on hold. What I ended up with was 0 songs getting recorded.
They had to pay for the hold.
You never know. Yeah.
Did they have to pay for the hold?
They don't. Nope.
No.
They'll just ask you. And as a writer who's like, a hungry writer who's like, trying to pay their bills, it's like you're kind of just hoping and wishing that, like, man, please just give me a cut.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
I love that date analogy, Mark. And so some of those, now when you said that a publisher sends you to a meet, now that's different than a writer's round, right? I mean, that might be just you going to meet with, a recording artist, or how does that work?
Correct. Yeah. So a writer's round is, I don't know if you guys are, familiar. I'm a huge stand-up fan. So like, the stand-ups, like they all kind of, it's almost like the same process I've noticed, where like they'll see who's on the lineup, and then they all meet up at the same bar or whatever it is, and then, you kind of know who's in your group, and then you kind of go up together for a right that your publisher sets up, and you're playing those rounds for like the public too. Like you're not just in somebody's living room. Mm-hmm. But for a right that a publisher sets up, like I would get sent to addresses. They'd be like, hey, so-and-so is trying to finish their album. Can you go here at 10 a.m. tomorrow? Here's the address. And you're like, yeah, no problem. So, you show up and you never know who you're going to be showing up to, because sometimes they don't give you the name and you're just like, okay, so, hope this is legit. And so, there was one time in particular, I remember I showed up and, knocked on the door, and this girl answered the door, and real pretty girl, and she was like, hey, sorry, she's like, I'm just finishing getting ready, you can sit wherever you want. And I was like, okay. So I go in and sit down, and I'm like looking around her house, and like there's a coffee table next to me, and there's a picture of a shirtless Terry Bradshaw just flexing, like in this like framed picture. And weird. Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, like, man, this girl must be a giant Steelers fan. And, so she comes downstairs. She's like, so sorry I was late. I was like, no, it's fine. So we sit down and we're talking. We write a song. It was really good. I did end up doing a recording of it, and I think she and one of our other friends did too. But after the write, like I was saying, you do like the DOC, date of creation, the title, and the names and everything. Well, I didn't have her name, so I said, what do you go by? Like, what's your name? What do I put on here? And she said, it's Rachel Bradshaw. And then it all clicked, and I was like, oh, this is Terry Bradshaw's daughter the entire time. And I was like, yeah. So different things like that. It's just, you never know who you're going to run into or work with.
That's a great story. I love that. What about, in terms of, you mentioned George Strait and Sam Hunt, at least the holds, even though ultimately those didn't result in hit recordings or anything. But who's another name, Mark, that maybe, or a couple other names that maybe you've worked with along the way?
There was a couple that I always mention when somebody asks me that I've worked with. He's out of the game now, but Granger Smith, he was a huge kind of champion of mine and brought me on tour with him and everything. But and he and I still talk, I don't know, probably twice a week still. But a really, really good guy. But Kip Moore was the first one to ever give me like my first shot as an opener for a major artist. And there was one that I remember, my buddy Ray Fulcher. He lived in Antioch, Tennessee. It was about 20 minutes away from downtown Nashville. But I would go over and write with him. And there was this bigger guy that was always in his house who would be like writing in the other room. And I could hear him singing and playing and stuff. And I asked Ray one day, Ray, who is that guy? And he's like, oh, that's Luke. I was like, he's gonna blow up. And he's like, yeah, that's what, everybody keeps saying that. Well, it turns out it is Luke Combs. And Ray actually has a lot of his major hits. So now Ray's name is Payday Ray.
I want that nickname.
No, yeah, we all do. Yeah.
It's safe to say he doesn't live in Antioch anymore.
Well, hey, if not Antioch, where? I mean, when you
Belmead, he's in Belmead.
Oh yeah, probably Belmead, Franklin. I mean, any of like the big house spots, I would guess.
And for people that get out to Nashville, you'll know exactly where that is, Belmead.
Yep.
Yeah, I got you, Mark. You talked about a little bit of your time. I think people listening to this here in Loveland, Ohio, need to know, again, as Tom suggested, he picked you up or caught your act for the first time at an opening of a restaurant here in Loveland, Ohio. So I guess the background also for Mark Leach, you are originally from here in Ohio. I guess, as you said, Barberton, Ohio. Mm-hmm. But you spent some time in Nashville, and as I understand it, you are back in Ohio currently. Is that correct?
I am, yeah. I came back during COVID. All the tours were shut down. Like, everything was, obviously, I don't have to tell everybody listening, but yeah, everything was shut down. So I came back, and my family shop was like, kind of struggling because they had to keep it open, but they didn't know how to do it. So they needed like extra hands in the building to get the food run out to the people's cars that couldn't enter the building. So I came back during that, and then I ended up just staying up here.
Yeah.
So in between, starting in Ohio and back in Ohio a little bit, tell us a little bit about your time in Nashville in terms of, I'm trying to figure out dates when you first went to Nashville and how things flew out, and how much time have you been in Nashville?
Yeah, so when I went down in 2010, I remember I was actually working at my family shop, and I wanted to get my songwriting better, because I knew if you're gonna, if you want to be a songwriter or an artist, like you have to, you got to be good at writing songs. So obviously I knew I wasn't great, and so I was trying to get a hold of like the best. And so I got a hold of, I didn't get a hold of him, the president of ASCAP at the time, which is a royalty company. You've got ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. They're basically like the Coke, Pepsi, and Mr. Pibb of royalties. Right. And so there was the president, Ralph Murphy, and I was like, I need to meet this guy because he just came out with a book called Murphy's Law of Songwriting. And so I read the book, and I called down to the ASCAP office every day for 2 weeks. And finally, I remember I was working. I think I was rolling dough at my family shop. And my phone rings, and I look at it, and I don't recognize the number. I answer it, and it was Ralph. And he said, "Are you the guy that keeps calling me?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Be down here on Tuesday." And I said, "Yes, sir." So I got a hold of my oldest brother. He and I went down to the meeting. It's actually a really funny story. So we went down to the meeting, and he and I are sitting at Rippy's Barbecue on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And I look at Chris because I'm nervous. Like, we're both like dressed up, like dress shirts, nice pants. And I'm like, "Hey, I think we got to get going." And he's like, "We got plenty of time. It's right around the corner." And I was like, "Okay." So this is unusual, by the way, because I'm always late. And Chris is always on time. So we're sitting there. I'm like, "Okay, well, that's true." Yeah, it's a true story. Yeah. And so, so I was like, "All right." Well, we get out of the restaurant and realize he looks at his phone and he goes, "Oh no!" And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "It's on the other side of town." And so I was like, "Oh my gosh!" So there's all construction going on. This was before all the new high rises and everything was built. So it's all just dirt. So he and I are just walking in like 100-degree weather in the dirt, and he sees a cab. And he's like, "We got to get a cab or we're going to be late." So we jump in a cab, and he looks at the driver and he goes, "I'll give you $20 to get us down the road as fast as you can." And so the guy looks at him, he takes the $20. He's weaving in and out of traffic. Gets us to the meeting. We show up in the lobby of this beautiful ASCAP building. Both of us are just dripping sweat. We look real professional at this point. And, go in and sit down with the president of the company. And he absolutely just rips all my songs apart. Ugh. But it was the best learning experience because of what he taught me in that meeting that I could go home with and then work on that myself.
Man, that's
a great story.
Oh, yeah, and that's a moment in time for you, for sure, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, and Mark, you're still doing aren't writers doing writes by Zoom calls now and stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still write with, a lot of friends, like people that I had really good first dates with. Yeah. We still write I'll get a hold of them, and you can write via Zoom. Everybody had to do that during COVID.
Yeah, so it's just changed. The world's changed, and so did your industry.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's cool. Like, you can do from Barberton, Ohio, what you were doing in Nashville, Tennessee. Same people, little different just technology, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Well, and then that
via Zoom.
I was going to say, and it's not going to be a Zoom call on Saturday, April 6th. You're going to be on the stage at Loveland Stage Company among the people, and doing that very thing, I guess, right? Or at least some sample of that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, me, Josh, and Evan, it'll be a 90-minute show that gives us 30 minutes apiece. But, I'm really excited. As closer it gets, the more excited I get because I know what it's like to banter with these guys, and I know that people that show up, they're going to have fun. They're going to laugh. They're going to hear good stories. They're going to hear good songs. And it's just going to be a really wholesome, really good time. So,
well, tell us a little bit about those guys. Josh Withenshaw and Evan Blankenship are going to be joining you, Mark Leach. So tell us a little bit about Josh and Evan and that relation. Apparently a good date.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I showed up, and a buddy of mine actually introduced me to Josh. And the first time I met Josh, we were sitting there, and one of I don't know how it became like a fan favorite, but the song is called Back Porch Vacation. And Josh and I were the writers on that, and so I remember the first time I met him, he and I both just had a very similar attitude towards it. We were like, we couldn't come up with anything serious that day, so we just said, what's the most ridiculous thing that we could come up with? And so we just threw all those ideas at the wall, and pretty much all of them stuck. And so then we were hitting it off and talking about musical backgrounds and everything and what we listened to. And we were talking about pop punk and rock, and found out that he was actually in the band that I would listen to, because he's a little bit older than me, but that I listened to in high school, that did one of my favorite punk covers of a song of all time. And I didn't even know I was writing with this guy for however many hours. And then turns out, and then ever since then, he's been one of my best friends. Like when I was in Nashville, like he was always the one that like went out with me on my birthday and let me stay with him, like if I had to come to town for something. So just a really, really good guy and one of the best guitar players I've ever got to work with.
Yeah, and that's Josh.
That's Josh. Yeah.
And the band that you're talking about, is that the Dangerous Summer?
Dangerous Summer, yeah. And actually, they've been doing world tours now for a little while. Like they're very they're pretty well known.
Oh, very cool. And then how about Evan? How about a little bit of background on Evan Blankenship?
Yeah, so Evan this was like one of those just chance meetings. So when I was in Barberton, not only was I working at my family shop, but I was bartending as well. And the manager came up to me and said, "You need to check this guy out. He used to play for Ohio State," and he handed me his demo. So I had heard people's demos before, and they're good. I'm not putting anybody down, but it was like I put his demo and I'm listening to it, and I looked at him and I was like, "Who is this guy?" And one of the best voices I've ever heard. And I was like, "Yeah." So my brother Chris and I are driving to Nashville, and I was telling Chris about him, and he goes, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Isn't that the kid who played for Ohio State? He moved to Nashville." And I said, "I don't know, man. Like, my manager at the bar just gave me his demo." So he said, "Yeah, you should look him up and reach out to him." So I looked him up on Twitter, and I sent him a message on Twitter, and he responded, and he said, "Actually, that's funny." He's like, "All my work buddies canceled on me. Do you want to meet me at the bar when you get here?" So we did. We met him there about, I want to say it was like 5, it had been like 5 o'clock. He just got off work. So we were sitting there at the bar at 5, and I'm pretty sure we were still hanging out about 3:30 in the morning over at Freer Dallas. Whoops. The last thing I remember seeing that night was Evan. He was eating some sort of like chili cheese Frito concoction on the curb. And Chris and I were both like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure that he's just like a long lost brother of ours."
That's a great story. So that's a great. Well, Mark, you've been great, and I almost want to say somewhat humble. I know that there's at least a couple of songs that people can relate to Mark Leach, and I'm curious about the background on. I have an idea on one, but curious about the background or the story that goes with "Bar Up in Heaven," and then I'm going to I want you to tell us, obviously, about a song called "I Come From Ohio." But talk about yourself for a second, Mark.
Yeah. So if There's a Bar Up in Heaven was written, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment. I didn't have any furniture. I just had an air mattress, and it was. There was a hole in it, so I had about 30 seconds of comfort before the whole thing deflated. And then I remember my mom texted me that night. I was just sitting playing my guitar. She texted me and my family in our group text, and she said, "This would have been the anniversary this is the anniversary of when your grandpa passed away." And then she said, "But if there's a bar up in heaven," and just left it at that. And I said, "Wow, that's such a great idea." And so I sat down on my deflated bed, and I just started writing the first verse and got part of the chorus done. And then somehow, I don't even know how I met them, but I got paired up with Doug Johnson, who wrote 3 Wooden Crosses for Annie Travis and Love Like Crazy for Lee Brice, and another woman named Pat Bunch, who worked for the Restless Heart for a long time. And the 3 of us sat down, and I remember we got stuck at one part, and I think it's the end of the chorus. "There's a bar up in heaven. If drinking is allowed, then there's a bar up in heaven where they all know you by now." And that kind of those last 2 lines I remember were really difficult to get, because it was like we knew that we had such a good song on our hands that it was like, if you got such a good song, you kind of just stay and wrestle it until it's lights out, So I remember Doug. And Josh Whiteshaw does this too. They call them thinking sticks. What they'll do is they'll go outside and smoke a cigarette, and normally when they come back inside, they've got it written. And so Pat and I are in there wrestling with these last 2 lines. Doug walks outside, he walks back in, and then he's like, "I got it." And then he just spews that line out. And we both looked at him, and we're like, "Where did that come from?" And he's like, it's what smoke breaks do for you. And but yeah, that song was the first song I ever wrote when I actually moved to Nashville, to live there. It's still my favorite song I've ever written. But I Come From Ohio was written when I came back to visit my family after I already moved. And I remember I was sitting there with my brother, and I was telling him that I was frustrated because everybody in Nashville was from Georgia or Alabama or Louisiana, and I was like the guy from Ohio. And I realized, either one, I could be upset about it, or two, I could just own it. And so I did. And I will say that it's kind of cool seeing that, like, since that song came out, one of the coolest things was having it played in the shoe before a Buckeyes game. The amount of people that show up to shows, and, like, sometimes people just come to shows just to hear that song. I've had a guy get mad at me one time because I forgot to play it. So I had to plug everything back in and get up there and play it for him. But to see the amount of artists that have come out of Ohio that have either there's three, four, five I could list off that have reached out to me to ask how to navigate the industry when they get down there. And so it's just cool to see that kind of Ohio piece taking place in Nashville. When I went down, it was like, I don't know anybody here that's from Ohio right now in the industry. So it's that's kind of a background for both of those.
Well, Mark, it has been an absolute pleasure. Time just flies when you're having fun, and this has been a blast, and time has flown by. We're 30 minutes plus, so we're kind of running out of time, and I hate to cut you short, but Tom Allen, a quick final word from you about what's going to happen and when it's going to happen at the Loveland Stage Company.
Well, thanks again, Chuck. It's April 6th, doors at 6:30. Show starts at 7 o'clock, as Mark said, 90 minutes of storytelling and music playing, and I think it's just going to make great theater, and I think the people of Loveland are going to have a ball, and the proceeds from the show will go towards some of the operating costs that they have putting these new capital improvements in. And I guess I'm misspeaking. It's not operating cost and capital improvement. But anyway, you get the idea. So, the money's going to help the stage company, and so it's a big win-win in terms of a good show and for a great cause.
Yeah. Well, Mark, again, as this time has flown by, I can only imagine how it is going to fly by. You said 90 minutes. It's probably going to feel like about 5 minutes with you and Josh and Evan together. It sounds like you guys are just going to have a ball and be able to share that with the audience on that Saturday, April 6th. So.
Yeah, I almost mentioned that earlier. I was going to say, if you're worried about the 90-minute part, I promise it's not going to feel like 90 minutes. Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much again, Tom Allen. Thank you, Mark Leach, for joining us here on Loveland Beacon Talks.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck. We appreciate it. Take care.
Look forward to seeing you on April 6th, guys.
All righty.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Tom Allen and Mark Leach for joining us to share a taste of the songwriting business in Music City, Nashville. You can catch Mark Leach along with singer-songwriters Evan Blankenship and Josh Withenshaw on stage at Loveland Stage Company Saturday, April 6th. Doors open at 6:30. Showtime is 7 p.m. Tickets are $15, available now at lovelandstagecompany.org. That's lovelandstagecompany.org. I'm Chuck Gibson saying thanks for listening. Loveland Beacon Talks is a presentation of Loveland Beacon as part of Loveland Beacon Digital Productions and Gibson Communications, LLC.